When we think about learning a new language, it's easy to imagine long lists of words to memorize, endless grammar exercises, and maybe even a bit of frustration when things don't click right away. But here's the thing, language isn't just about rules and vocabulary. It's about communication, emotion, and connection. And that's why a story form makes learning English feel so much more natural and enjoyable. Stories have been part of our human experience for as long as we've existed. Before books, before writing, before classrooms, people told each other stories around a fire. We remember stories far better than we remember dry facts, because stories have characters, emotions, and events that our brains latch onto. They don't just feed us information, they pull us into an experience. And that's exactly what happens when we use stories to learn English. Imagine you're reading about a group of friends preparing for a special celebration. You start to hear their conversations. You notice how they greet each other, how they express excitement, how they ask for help or give instructions. Without even realizing it, you're absorbing real, everyday language in context. You're not just learning that the word happy means something. You're feeling it through the characters' laughter or the way they describe their day. This emotional link makes the word stick in your memory in a way no vocabulary list ever could. The beauty of learning through story is that it feels less like study and more like living through moments. It takes away the pressure of, I must remember this grammar rule, and replaces it with a sense of curiosity. What happens next? Will the plan work? Who will surprise whom? And in answering those questions, you're following along with natural sentence structures, hearing idioms in action, and picking up on the rhythm of spoken English. It's like learning a song. You start to remember the tune before you even try to memorize the lyrics. Another reason it's so effective is because it mirrors how we learned our first language. None of us started by memorizing conjugation charts as toddlers. We listened, we watched, we experienced. Stories recreate that environment for us as adults. They provide repetition without boredom. Phrases and words come up again and again, but each time in a slightly different, more meaningful way. That repetition builds understanding and confidence without feeling forced. And when the story has moments that make you laugh, or feel suspense, or even relate to the characters, it's not just a language lesson anymore, it's entertainment. That shift is powerful because our brains learn better when we're relaxed and engaged. The same way a catchy song stays in your head for days, a well-told story in English will echo in your thoughts, and with it, the language that came along for the ride. It also opens the door to cultural understanding. Stories don't just teach words, they teach how those words live in the real world, how people use them when they're polite, when they're casual, how tone can change meaning. You can read a grammar rule about polite requests, but until you've heard a character gently ask for help in the middle of a scene, you might not feel how it truly works. In a way, stories act like a bridge. On one side is the learner, full of curiosity but maybe unsure about how to step forward. On the other side is fluency, with all its natural flow, ease, and confidence. And the story, with its characters, events, and emotions, is the path that takes you across without you even noticing how far you've gone. You just keep walking because you want to know what happens next. That's why when we talk about learning English in a way that's both effective and enjoyable, the story format stands out. It doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like an adventure. One that just happens to make you better at expressing yourself every step of the way. And when you enjoy the process, you're far more likely to keep going, to keep improving, and to eventually find yourself speaking and understanding with the same ease you once only imagined. Because in the end, it's not just about learning the language, it's about living it. When it comes to learning, the setting and the atmosphere matter just as much as the lesson itself. That's why using new events and celebrations as the backdrop for English learning can be so effective. Think about it, celebrations are full of life, color, and energy. They bring people together, create moments of excitement, and often involve unique traditions and expressions. When we place a story in the middle of such an event, the language stops feeling like something from a textbook and starts feeling alive. It becomes part of an experience that you can see, hear, and almost feel. Imagine walking into a room decorated for a celebration. There's music playing, people laughing, food being served, and voices all around you speaking in English. The conversations are about the preparations, the invitations, the outfits, the music choice, even the last-minute surprises. Each of those moments carries useful vocabulary and expressions, but instead of memorizing them in isolation, you're learning them in a real, exciting context. That connection to a lively scene makes the words stick in your mind more naturally. The beauty of using these backdrops is that they're rich in variety. A birthday, for example, might involve greetings, gift, giving, and singing. A cultural festival might bring in costumes, parades, and special foods. Even a simple community gathering could include speeches, announcements, and friendly small talk. In each case, you're learning the kind of English people actually use when they're sharing joy and celebrating together. And because celebrations are filled with emotion, whether it's laughter, surprise, or heartfelt thanks, the language carries that emotion with it. It becomes something you feel, not just something you read. There's also a natural motivation that comes with these moments. When the backdrop is exciting, you want to pay attention. You want to know what's going on, what's being said, and how you can be part of it. That desire to be included pushes you to listen more carefully, to remember key phrases, and to practice using them yourself. Instead of forcing yourself to study, you find yourself pulled into the learning process because you want to join the conversation happening in that vibrant scene. Another powerful aspect is how celebrations often bring together different voices and perspectives. You might have a conversation with an old friend, then a quick exchange with a stranger, then hear a speech from someone you admire, all in one setting. This variety exposes you to different accents, tones, and ways of speaking. It's like attending a mini English immersion event without even leaving the story. And let's not forget that events and celebrations often have a sequence, a build-up, a main moment, and a conclusion. This structure mirrors the way good stories are told, which makes it easier for learners to follow along. You understand what's happening because you can see the pattern, the anticipation before, the action during, and the reflection after. Each part offers its own language opportunities, from planning and inviting to describing and remembering. These backdrops also create a sense of realism. If you're learning how to say, "Could you pass me the plate, please?" while sitting in a classroom, it's just a sentence. But if you're learning it during a lively dinner, seen at a celebration, with the smell of food in the air and people chatting all around, it becomes a moment you can almost relive in your mind. That sensory connection makes it easier to recall later because your brain associates it with a vivid, memorable experience. Even more, celebrations naturally encourage interaction. They're not passive events, so you don't just watch, you participate. And in a story, that means the characters are constantly speaking, reacting, and responding to one another. Every exchange is a chance to pick up new vocabulary, notice how questions are asked, or hear how people express excitement, gratitude, or even surprise. You start to see patterns in how language flows between people, and that awareness builds your own confidence in using English. The truth is, learning within the backdrop of a celebration turns the process into something joyful. It blends the excitement of a special moment with the practical skill, building of language learning, creating a combination that's hard to forget. And when you're enjoying yourself, when you're caught up in the energy of the event, you're not just learning, you're living the language. Because in the end, the most memorable lessons are the ones wrapped in moments worth remembering. One of the most powerful parts of learning English through a story is the way conversations bring the language to life. When characters talk to each other, it's not just about words. It's about tone, rhythm, emotion, and context. You hear how questions are asked, how answers are given, how people interrupt each other politely, or how they show excitement or surprise. All of this is real communication, and it's exactly what builds both listening and speaking skills. When you listen to a conversation in a story, you're not just hearing isolated sentences, you're hearing a flow. There's a natural give and take, a backhand, forth that shows you how English works in real situations. You notice how short phrases like really or I see are used to keep the conversation moving. You catch how people pause, how they emphasize certain words, and how their tone changes depending on what they're feeling. This is the kind of listening practice you can't get from a simple grammar exercise. And the more you hear it, the more you start to imitate it. Speaking is, in many ways, an echo of what we've heard before. The sentences and expressions you hear in conversations start to slip into your own speech without you even forcing them. You might catch yourself using the same polite greetings, the same casual expressions, or even the same way of agreeing or disagreeing that you heard in the story. That's because your brain learns patterns, and conversations are full of patterns. Stories also make conversations feel natural because they happen in a meaningful context. When two friends in the story are deciding what to do for a celebration, you're hearing actual decision-making language. When someone is apologizing for being late, you're hearing real, life phrases for saying sorry. This context matters because it helps you remember when and how to use the expressions you're learning. Listening to conversations in stories also trains your ear to handle different speeds and styles of speech. Sometimes characters speak quickly when they're excited. Other times, they slow down when they're explaining something important. You begin to pick up on these subtle changes, which is a skill you need in real life situations. It's one thing to understand a single, clearly spoken sentence, but it's another thing entirely to follow along when two people are chatting naturally. Story conversations give you that challenge in a safe, enjoyable way. And because you're invested in the story, you want to keep listening. You're curious about what's going to happen next, so you stay focused. That focus is key for developing listening skills. You're not zoning out or forcing yourself to pay attention. You're engaged because you don't want to miss a detail. Even small exchanges in the dialogue can hold clues about what's coming, and that keeps your brain active and alert. From a speaking perspective, these conversations are like ready-made models. If you practice reading them aloud, you're not just repeating words. You're practicing pronunciation, intonation, and flow. You're learning where to place emphasis, when to pause, and how to sound natural rather than robotic. Over time, your mouth and tongue get used to forming the sounds of English more smoothly, and your confidence grows. Another hidden benefit is learning how to respond quickly. In a conversation, you don't have time to stop and think for too long. You need to react naturally. By hearing lots of back and forth exchanges, your brain starts to store response templates. The next time someone asks you how's it going, you don't freeze. You remember how the characters in your story answered, and you adapt it to your situation. These story conversations also show you that English isn't just about perfect grammar, it's about being understood and understanding others. You'll notice characters using short forms, contractions, and even incomplete sentences that still make sense because of the context. You learn that communication is about connection, not just correctness. That realization takes away a lot of the pressure and helps you speak more freely. When you think about it, conversations are the heart of language. They're how we build relationships, share ideas, and understand each other. A story filled with realistic conversations doesn't just teach you words. It teaches you how to use those words in a way that feels alive and authentic. And that's the kind of learning that stays with you long after the story ends. Because in the end, every word you hear in a story's conversation is one more step towards speaking with confidence in the real world. One of the most encouraging things about learning English is knowing that you don't have to understand everything at once to make progress. That's where reading with graded language makes such a difference. It means the story is written in a way that matches your current level, so you're not constantly stumbling over words or struggling to make sense of complex grammar. Instead, you can focus on understanding the meaning, enjoying the events, and slowly building your skills. When a story is graded, it's like someone has cleared the path ahead of you. The vocabulary is chosen carefully so you can follow along without feeling lost. The sentences are structured in a way that's easy to process, but still rich enough to challenge you just the right amount. You're not reading a simplified version that feels dull or childish. You're reading something that's still engaging, still full of emotion, and still worth your attention. This approach works for all kinds of learners because it respects where you are on your journey. If you're a beginner, you might start with very short, clear sentences. That lets you focus on the basic patterns of the language, how words fit together, how a question is formed, how ideas are connected. You get the satisfaction of finishing a page or a chapter without feeling overwhelmed, and that sense of accomplishment keeps you motivated. As you move to an intermediate level, the graded language gradually introduces more complex structures and new vocabulary. It doesn't throw everything at you at once. It builds layer by layer, like adding bricks to a wall. Each new word you learn is supported by the words you already know, so you can guess meaning from context without stopping to look it up every time. That guessing skill is actually a key part of real life communication, because in the real world, you won't know every single word people use. For advanced learners, graded reading still offers value because it allows for speed and fluency practice. Even when the vocabulary is familiar, reading quickly and smoothly without hesitation strengthens your confidence. And if the story is interesting, you're also picking up subtler things, like tone, rhythm, and style, without even thinking about it. One of the biggest advantages of graded language is how it keeps you in the flow. When a story is too difficult, you end up stopping every few sentences to check the dictionary, and that breaks the rhythm. But when it's at the right level, you can read continuously, almost forgetting you're reading in another language. That continuous exposure is what helps your brain start to think in English, instead of constantly translating in your head. It also means you can focus on more than just the meaning of individual words. You start to notice how ideas are connected, how one event leads to another, and how characters express themselves. These are the patterns that make English feel natural, and they're easier to spot when the language is clear and within your reach. Another important thing is that graded stories make learning feel achievable for everyone. Not all learners have the same background or experience. Some may have studied English for years, while others are just starting. But with graded levels, each person can choose a story that feels comfortable yet challenging enough to help them grow. That sense of choice is powerful. It turns reading into a personal journey rather than a forced task. The emotional side matters too. When you can follow a story without constant struggle, you enjoy it more. You feel connected to the characters, curious about the plot, and eager to turn the page. That emotional engagement is a huge driver of learning. If you love what you're reading, your brain naturally works harder to understand and remember it. In the end, reading with graded language isn't about limiting yourself, it's about building a strong foundation. It's like learning to swim in the shallow end before moving to deeper water. You develop the skills, the confidence, and the comfort you need so that when you do face more challenging texts, you're ready. Because the real goal isn't just to read English, it's to enjoy reading it, no matter where you start. One of the most effective ways to truly remember new vocabulary is to experience it in a realistic situation, even if that situation exists only inside a story. Words on their own can be slippery. They can enter your mind during a study session and disappear just as quickly. But when those same words are tied to an event you can picture, to characters you can imagine, and to emotions you can almost feel, they have a way of staying with you. That's the magic of realistic situations in stories. They transform vocabulary from something abstract into something living. Think about learning the word invitation. If you simply read the definition, you might remember it for a short time. But if you read a scene where a character walks into a kitchen holding a colorful envelope, smiling and saying, "Look, we've been invited to the party on Saturday," suddenly, invitation isn't just a word. It's a part of a moment. You can see the envelope, hear the tone of excitement, and connect it to the experience of being included in something special. That mental image and emotional connection make the word far more memorable. Realistic situations give vocabulary a home. Instead of floating in your memory as something disconnected, each word becomes anchored to an event or action. When you recall the story later, the vocabulary comes along with it naturally. This is how our brains work. We remember things better when they're connected to experiences, even imagined ones. That's why you can often recall dialogue or details from a story months later, but struggle to remember a random list of words you once studied. Another advantage is that realistic situations show you exactly how vocabulary is used. In a dictionary, a word may have several meanings, but in a story, you see it in action. You notice the expressions that go with it, the kind of tone people use when saying it, and whether it's formal, casual, polite, or playful. This context is just as important as the meaning itself, because using a word in the wrong way can sound strange even if it's technically correct. Stories also allow repetition without it feeling forced. In real life, certain words will appear more often in specific situations. For example, in a scene set at a restaurant, you'll naturally encounter words like menu, order, bill, and reservation multiple times. But because they're woven into a conversation or a sequence of events, you hardly notice the repetition. It just feels natural. And yet, that repetition is exactly what helps those words sink into your memory. The emotional layer of realistic situations makes a big difference as well. We remember emotionally charged events more vividly than neutral ones. So if a character is nervous about giving a speech, you remember the vocabulary connected to that nervousness. If another character is overjoyed about a surprise gift, the words they use in that moment are stamped into your memory alongside the feeling of happiness. Language learning becomes more than memorization. It becomes an emotional experience. It's also worth noting that realistic situations mirror the kinds of moments you might face in your own life. When you later find yourself in a similar situation, the vocabulary from the story comes back to you. If you've read a story where a character negotiates a price at a market, you might recall the exact phrases when you try it yourself. The story has already prepared you without you even realizing it at the time. This approach works for all kinds of learners because it taps into something we all share, the way our minds naturally store and retrieve information. We don't file words away in isolation. We store them as part of a bigger picture. Stories give us that picture with realistic scenes that feel like they could happen to anyone, anywhere. And because these situations feel real, you engage with them more deeply. You're not just reading about a character, you're imagining what you would say or do in their place. That mental participation strengthens your connection to the language and increases the chances that you'll remember it. In the end, when vocabulary lives inside a moment that feels real, it becomes more than just language. It becomes part of your own mental experience, ready to be used whenever you need it. One of the greatest challenges in learning anything new, especially a language, is staying motivated long enough to see real progress. We've all had moments where the excitement fades and the process starts to feel like hard work. That's why combining entertainment with study can be such a game changer. When the learning itself feels enjoyable, your focus sharpens, your energy lasts longer, and you actually look forward to the next lesson instead of dreading it. Entertainment pulls you in without effort. Whether it's a story, a game, a video, or a playful activity, the fun element grabs your attention in a way that pure study rarely can. You find yourself concentrating, not because you're forcing your mind to stay on track, but because you're genuinely curious or invested in what's happening. That kind of attention is powerful. It's the kind that doesn't wear out quickly, which means you can spend more time learning without even realizing it. When you merge entertainment with study, you create a sense of flow. You're so engaged in following the plot of a story or solving a problem in a fun challenge that the hours seem to pass quickly. And all the while, you're absorbing vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and cultural insights almost effortlessly. You're not stopping every few minutes to think, "Now I must learn this word." You're picking it up naturally because it's part of the experience you're enjoying. This combination also taps into a very human quality, our love for rewards. In entertainment, the reward might be finding out what happens next in a story, unlocking the next stage in a game, or laughing at a funny scene. In study, the reward is progress and mastery. When you combine the two, each moment of entertainment doubles as a moment of achievement. You don't just get the satisfaction of finishing a chapter. You also get the joy of a great story or a clever twist that makes you want to keep going. Another important factor is emotional connection. Entertainment often stirs emotions. Excitement, suspense, laughter, even empathy for characters. Those emotions act as glue, helping the language stick in your mind. If a story makes you laugh out loud or keeps you on the edge of your seat, you're far more likely to remember the expressions and phrases used in that scene. It's the difference between hearing a sentence once in a classroom and living it through a moment you can recall vividly. By blending fun with learning, you also create a safe environment for making mistakes. In a purely academic setting, mistakes can feel frustrating or even embarrassing. But in an entertaining context, they're part of the game. If you misunderstand a joke in a story, you don't feel defeated. You just want to figure it out so you can enjoy it fully. That mindset shift removes a lot of the pressure and makes you more willing to experiment with the language. This approach also keeps your energy consistent over the long term. Anyone can study hard for a short period, but sustaining effort for months or years requires enjoyment. Entertainment gives you that sustainability. It turns practice into something you do because you want to, not because you have to, and that difference is what keeps learners from giving up when progress feels slow. When you think about it, many of the most successful learning experiences we've had in life probably had some form of entertainment built in. It might have been a teacher telling engaging stories, a friendly competition with classmates, or an interactive activity that made the lesson come alive. The principle is the same. When your brain is entertained, it's more open to learning and more likely to retain what it takes in. So instead of separating study and enjoyment into two different worlds, bringing them together makes the journey not only more productive, but also far more satisfying. You stay present, you stay curious, and you stay motivated. And that motivation, once it's fueled by enjoyment, becomes incredibly hard to lose. Because the truth is, when learning feels like something you love to do, you'll never need to be pushed, you'll be pulled forward by your own enthusiasm. And so, through stories that are engaging, realistic, and built at the right level, we find a way to learn that feels natural and exciting. When entertainment and meaningful situations guide the journey, language becomes more than words. It becomes an experience we live. Let's keep learning not just with effort, but with joy, so every step forward feels like part of a story worth remembering.